2 weeks of truce between the US and Iran, now extended indefinitely, according to the US president, leaving the future of the war in limbo. The current ceasefire took effect on 8th April, after a month and a half of spiraling conflict between Washington and Tehran that spread across the Gulf and Israel. Now, hours before the truce, Donald Trump had threatened to wipe out Iran's civilization, but he walked back on that threat, announcing late Tuesday night that both sides will lay down its arms temporarily. Washington paused its attacks, and Tehran, in turn, agreed to temporarily reopen the Strait of Hormuz. Both sides proposed their own plans for sustained peace. And 3 days later, mediator Pakistan hosted US and Iranian delegations in Islamabad for peace talks. But 21 hours of negotiations yielded no agreement, both sides blaming the other for the breakdown. US Vice President J.D. Vance accused Tehran of refusing to accept Washington's offer, which called for Iran to forgo its nuclear weapons. Tehran accused the US of having excessive demands. And less than a day after those talks, President Trump announced a blockade on all vessels entering and exiting Iranian ports from 10 a.m. US Eastern Time on 13th April. 4 days later, Iran reopened the waterway to all commercial vessels, this coinciding with a 10-day ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon. The US, however, maintained its naval blockade will remain in full force until a deal was reached to end the war. Tehran reversing course just 1 day later, shutting the strait once again, accusing the US of breaking an agreement by maintaining its blockade. Flow of vessels at a virtual standstill, with only several ships passing through amid the back and forth. Some were also reportedly attacked while trying to pass the strait. Mr. Trump not backing down, warning the US will not be blackmailed over the waterway. As the US seized an Iranian-flagged container ship, the US Central Command said the vessel, named Tuska, had tried to run its blockade. Iran accused the US of armed piracy. The weekend diplomatic push failing to secure a second round of talks in Islamabad. The US vice president was initially set to travel to the Pakistani capital, but walking back on that as Iran maintained it will not send any delegation there, leaving prospects of a prolonged deal still up in the air. And for more on this, we're joined by Jon B. Alterman, who is Brzezinski Chair for Global Security and Geostrategy at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. John, with Iran saying it has seized cargo ships in the Strait of Hormuz, as we've just heard, is the US-Iran ceasefire still effectively holding? And how much does it risk and raise that risk of escalation in the region?
Well, it's not really a ceasefire. A blockade is an act of war. Attacking traffic through the Gulf is an act of war. The United States and Israel aren't bombing Iran. That, I think, from an Iranian perspective, is an improvement. But I think what you're seeing is the United States saying, we don't have to be so impatient. The Iranians saying, we can do this for a while longer. The rest of the world, in many ways suffering much more than the United States, is getting impatient. But I think what you're seeing is President Trump saying, let's just give this a little bit of time and make the Iranians hurt more. They will come to the table and they will be less demanding than they've been in the past.
Well, it's still a unilateral ceasefire to some extent, because the Iranian advisors are framing Trump's ceasefire extension as deceptive. They've called it a ploy to buy time for a surprise strike. Do you agree with this assessment, and could we see further escalation on both sides very soon?
We certainly could, but as I say, a blockade is an act of war. So if you're blockading Iranian ports, you're determining that Iran can't get any shipments in and can't get any shipments out. That is an act of war. That's not a ceasefire. Iran has said they won't negotiate under fire. You can say that the Iranians are right. You can say that the Iranians blockading or stopping traffic through the Strait of Hormuz is also an act of war. I think what you're seeing is the war move to a different phase. But make no mistake, there is still a war going on. Each side is trying to hurt the other, and each side thinks the other side is more urgently in need of getting to the next phase than it is. And to me, that means that we are likely to be days or weeks away from any sort of diplomatic movement at all.
So what are the biggest sticking points then that are still blocking this lasting US-Iran agreement?
Like, I don't think you're going to get to a lasting US-Iran agreement from where we are now. It is going to be very hard to negotiate. There are a lot of technical details. The Iranians are both expert negotiators and patient negotiators. The American team, I think, is in many cases new to a lot of this issue set. They're not very interested in the previous negotiating record. So I think any way you go from negotiations, the best you're going to do is you get an agreement to negotiate more and more and more into the future. It will take months or years to get to a fundamental agreement. I'm not sure the Trump administration has internalized that completely. I think they would like a much better agreement than the JCPOA, the 2015 nuclear agreement. They'd like a much better one very quickly. I don't think that's in the offing. It's going to take time. The question is, can we open the strait while that's happening? And I think we will be able to, but it'll be a while yet.
Meanwhile, Israel-Lebanon talks, that's expected on Thursday. How could those outcomes there directly influence the US-Iran truce negotiations?
I think that the Israel-Lebanon piece is sort of a necessary but not sufficient. I think the United States would like to see at least things moving in a somewhat positive direction there. Again, it's a little bit frozen. It's at a relatively low level. The government of Lebanon really isn't in a position to assert its control over the south, but it's moving, in a sort of useful, necessary direction. And I think that for the United States, that's adequate, and for the Iranians, it's adequate.
Well, with Israel striking southern Lebanon and also Hezbollah retaliating despite that ceasefire, could we see this fighting end and end up pulling Iran into a much bigger regional war?
I don't think Iran wants to fight a larger regional war. I think they would like to demonstrate their ability to resist. They would like to demonstrate their resolve. But I think the Iranians do want to get to a point where they're negotiating with the United States over time. I think that the Trump administration is very confident that they can negotiate over time. So I think we're going to get there rather than have an all-out regional war. But we may, in the interim, have the Iranians demonstrating some of the tools they have that they haven't used yet. More cyber tools, some terrorist attacks, more actions by proxies. We certainly could see that if this gets dragged out and the Iranians feel they need to insert some urgency into this, and they feel the Americans are just slowly strangling them and not feeling enough pain. If that happens, you can get into a cycle where things get worse before they get better.
Jon, thank you so much for sharing your insights with us. I've been speaking with Jon B. Alterman, who is Brzezinski Chair for Global Security and Geostrategy at the Center for Strategic and International Studies.